janitor fixed what a full team of engineers gave up on, and what happened next left the CEO frozen in place. You ever witness someone do something they were never trained for, yet they do it better than the so-called experts? It doesn't happen often, but when it does, you remember it. That's exactly what happened late one quiet Tuesday night inside a half-lit warehouse in Fort Wayne, Indiana. It was just past 9 p.m. Most of the building was empty, the day shift long gone, and even the night crew had already wrapped up. But down near the back of Brylock Industries, past the shipping bay, and behind a rarely used storeroom door, a man in dark gray coveralls was still working. His name was Calvin Rhodes. He wasn't wearing a lab coat or a badge, just a worn pair of maintenance overalls with his name stitched across the chest and sleeves rolled up to the elbows. He didn't look like a genius. He looked like the guy who changes the lights and fixes the leaky pipes. But Calvin had something no one else on the team did. He actually listened to broken things. That night, he walked into the storeroom with purpose, not because someone called him, not because it was on his schedule, but because something inside him wouldn't let him leave it alone. He moved past stacks of old monitors, bins of tangled cables, and metal shelves weighed down with forgotten parts. And in the far corner, like some discarded relic, sat Sorting Unit 7X, a massive piece of equipment vital to the company's automated logistics system. Or at least it used to be. The engineers had tried fixing it for weeks, then months. Eventually, they gave up, said it wasn't worth the time or resources, marked it decommissioned, and left it to rot. But Calvin couldn't walk past it without wondering, what if it wasn't dead? What if it just needed someone to care enough to try again? So, little by little, on his own time, with no one watching and no recognition waiting for him, Calvin started working on it. He didn't have access to schematics or factory updates. No team, no supervisor, just a soldering pen, a flashlight, a socket wrench, and a flattened cardboard box covered in pencil sketches and wiring diagrams that only he could understand. He lay down on the concrete, slid beneath the machine like a mechanic under a vintage car, and began making quiet adjustments. "Come on now," he whispered, almost like he was talking to an old friend. "You've still got something left in you. I know it." The machine groaned softly, then fell silent again. He didn't flinch. He just smiled. "You're a fighter," he murmured. "Good, so am I." What Calvin didn't know was that just a few corridors away, Miles Henley, the CEO of Brylock Industries, had returned unexpectedly. He'd forgotten his laptop after a late dinner meeting and came back alone to grab it before his early flight the next morning. He wasn't planning to see anyone. He wasn't expecting to find anything. But as he passed the hallway near the storeroom, he paused. The door, usually shut tight, was cracked open, and there was light inside. Then came a sound. Not just any sound. It wasn't the hum of AC or the buzz of cheap lighting. It was mechanical, alive, rhythmic. Something was running in there. Curious, he stepped closer. What he saw through the doorway stopped him cold. Hidden behind a tall shelving unit, partially lit by a flickering overhead bulb, was Calvin, crouched beside the sorting machine, hands steady, eyes locked in. There was no hesitation in the way he moved, no trial and error, no second guessing, just precision, quiet confidence. And then, before the CEO's eyes, the machine jerked once, then again. A sputter, a spin, and suddenly, it came to life. The robotic arm lifted a part, scanned it, sorted it, and dropped it perfectly into a bin, then did it again. And again, Miles blinked. This wasn't real. This was the machine the engineering team had declared beyond saving, the one they said would cost more to fix than to replace. And yet, here it was, fully operational. And the man who did it wasn't an engineer, wasn't a specialist. He was the janitor. He didn't interrupt, just watched. Because in that moment, he realized this wasn't just a lucky fix. This was skill. This was intuition. This was someone who didn't see broken as final, but as the beginning of something worth understanding. Calvin still hadn't noticed him. He was too focused. At that point, he'd rigged up a cracked tablet screen into a makeshift interface, linked through an old circuit board he'd soldered by hand. He tapped a wire in place with the back of a screwdriver and whispered, "Let's try real-time sequencing. You ready?" The machine whirred louder and executed a flawless cycle. Miles, still standing in the doorway, no longer saw a janitor. He saw a problem solver, a builder, a mind that belonged in a lab, not just a utility closet. And in that silent moment, surrounded by dust, wire bins, and old parts, something shifted. Not just the machine, but the entire future of the man fixing it. It sorted one item, then another, then three at once. No stutters, no delay. It was fast, precise, alive. Miles let out a slow breath. He hadn't even realized he'd been holding it. Calvin finally looked up and froze. For a moment, neither man spoke. They just stared at each other, one in a pressed suit, the other in worn coveralls, surrounded by wires and dust. Two worlds, one moment. "Mr. Henley?" Calvin's voice came out uncertain, quieter than usual, like he wasn't sure if this was real or if he was in trouble. Miles stepped into the room, slow and deliberate. "I didn't mean to sneak up on you." Calvin stood, instinctively wiping his hands on a rag, his posture straightened, his voice a little tense. "Sorry, sir. I wasn't trying to break protocol. I've been working on it after hours." "You fixed that?" Miles pointed at the sorting unit. Calvin hesitated for half a second, then nodded. "Yes, sir. Been chipping away at it off the clock. No official work order." Miles narrowed his eyes, but there was no anger in them, just curiosity. "And it's working?" "Mostly," Calvin replied. "Still a couple bugs in the scan timing, but the motor's clean. I rebuilt the controller, pulled parts off the return shelf. Nothing official. I hope that's okay." Miles stepped closer to the machine, the one that 3 separate engineers had labeled scrap. "Engineering told me it was unfixable," he said, almost to himself. Calvin gave a tired shrug. "Guess they didn't want to bother with it." Then came the question that changed everything. "You an engineer, Rhodes?" Calvin shook his head. "No, sir, not on paper." Miles studied him. The calloused hands, the quiet confidence, the way every tool had its place. Nothing sloppy, nothing rushed. "So where'd you learn this?" Calvin looked down, as if the answer was buried in the floor. "I had a scholarship to Purdue, electrical engineering. Made it 3 years before my dad got sick. Medical bills stacked up. I dropped out to help cover them. After that, I just took work where I could find it." "You never went back?" "Thought about it," Calvin said quietly. "But life moves fast. People stop asking. You stop bringing it up." Silence. Miles turned back to the machine. It scanned, sorted, dropped, flawlessly, faster than the replacement model the company had just ordered. He glanced back at Calvin. "You know, there are people in this company who walked past this thing 100 times and never gave it a second look." Calvin shrugged again. "I don't like throwing things out if they still got life in them." That made Miles smile, just barely, but enough. "You mind if I show this to the engineering team tomorrow?" Calvin blinked. "I mean, sure, I guess. I don't know what they'll think." "We'll find out," Miles said, already pulling out his phone. "You here at 8 a.m.? I usually start at 7 o'clock. I'll have someone cover your shift. 5th floor conference room. Be there." Calvin nodded slowly, still trying to process what was happening. Miles turned to leave, but paused in the doorway. "Rhodes." "Yes, sir?" "Nice work." Then he was gone. But Calvin didn't move. He just stood there, looking at the machine, and for the first time in years, wondering, what if everything was about to change? That night, Calvin didn't sleep. He lay on his old mattress in his tiny one-bedroom off Jefferson Boulevard, eyes fixed on the ceiling. His mind raced, not with fear, but with questions. What exactly had he just stepped into? Did Miles really mean what he said? What if it was a fluke? What if the engineers laughed him out of the room? By 5:30 a.m., he was already up. He pressed his uniform twice, polished his boots, trimmed his beard, hands still shaking. Something inside him told him this was the kind of day that could split your life into before and after. At 6:55, he sat in his truck outside Brylock's main entrance, watching the usual stream of employees roll in. The forklift drivers with their coffee, the office staff with their earbuds, the managers checking their email while walking fast to look busy. None of them noticed him, but today, for the first time, he wasn't one of them. At 8:01, Calvin stood at the glass doors of the fifth-floor conference room. He looked out of place, still in gray coveralls, while the room was filled with people in polos, slacks, button-downs. A few engineers already seated, flipping through notes, sipping from branded mugs. Then the door opened, and everything went quiet. Miles Henley stepped in. No long intro, no warm-up speech. He looked around the room, then simply said, "This is Calvin Rhodes. He's not part of your team. He works in maintenance, but last night, he brought back to life a piece of equipment your department declared beyond repair 3 months ago." The engineers looked up. Some raised eyebrows. One even set down his coffee. Then Miles turned to Calvin and said, "Tell them what you did. Tell them what you did." Calvin swallowed, then cleared his throat. Well, the 7X sorter had a blown capacitor, the main board was fried, and the scan sensor was completely misaligned. Diagnostic software was outdated, so I built a basic interface from 2 old tablets, rewired the harness, and remapped the signal flow using a custom path. He paused, scanning the room. They were listening, but nobody quite believed him yet. Then one engineer broke the silence. "You used parts from the return shelf?" "Yes, sir," Calvin nodded. "After hours. A little bit each night." Another leaned forward, skeptical. "That unit wasn't just broken, it was obsolete. Why waste time on it?" Calvin shrugged. "Obsolete doesn't mean useless, just means nobody tried hard enough yet." The room fell still. Then Miles pointed to the large monitor at the front of the room. "I had someone film it this morning." He pressed play. The footage showed the 7X sorter, fully operational. It scanned, sorted, moved with precision and speed, faster than its brand-new replacement model. One engineer sat straighter, another quietly picked up a pen and started taking notes. When the video ended, Miles turned back to the room. "I want each of you to spend the next hour with Mr. Rhodes. Ask questions. Learn how he did what he did. Then give me recommendations, what we can learn, and how to apply it to our systems. Clear?" He turned to Calvin. "You good with that?" Calvin's voice was steady this time. "Yes, sir." And for the first time since stepping into that conference room, he allowed himself a small, uncertain smile. But not everyone smiled back. Among the engineers was a sharp-eyed man with a tight jaw. Trevor Bain, senior systems engineer. He leaned forward, arms crossed, tone sharp. "So let me get this straight. You rerouted a triple-channel relay using parts from where? A recycling bin?" Calvin nodded without blinking. "And a bit of copper wire I stripped from a busted floor fan." Trevor raised an eyebrow like he'd just caught a bluff. "That's not even in the manual." "I know," Calvin said. "That's why I didn't use the manual." Some of the younger engineers chuckled quietly, but Trevor didn't find it funny. "And where'd you learn any of this? You have credentials?" "I studied electrical engineering at Purdue," Calvin replied calmly. "Made it through junior year before I had to leave. Family stuff." Trevor folded his arms. "But no degree, no license, no certifications, so why should we take advice from you?" That one stung. The room tensed. Calvin took a deep breath. "I'm not here to give advice," he said. "I just saw something broken, and I fixed it, that's all." There was a beat of silence. Then Miles stood up, slowly, deliberately. "Trevor, are you saying we should ignore talent just because someone didn't take the traditional path?" "I'm saying we can't rebuild our systems around someone with no formal background." Miles' voice sharpened just slightly. One person. No budget, no team, no schedule. And he fixed a system no one else here could, in his spare time. Trevor opened his mouth, but Miles cut him off. "This isn't about job titles anymore. It's about results." The room was dead quiet. until a soft voice spoke from the back corner. "He didn't just fix it," said Elise Tran, a young software engineer. "He rewired the signal paths to run cleaner than the factory configuration. I checked it this morning." All eyes turned toward her. "It's not just operational," she said. "It's performing better than spec." Calvin looked at her, surprised. Elise gave him a small, sincere nod. Miles smiled, then turned to Calvin. "How'd you feel about spending a few weeks upstairs? Trial basis. Sit with the team, learn the systems, share what you know, see where it leads." Calvin hesitated. He wasn't used to being noticed, let alone offered something like this. "I mean, I'd still be on the maintenance crew, right?" "No," Miles said. "You'd be on special assignment, reporting directly to me." The room shifted again. Trevor looked like he'd bitten into a lemon. Elise gave Calvin a quiet thumbs up. Calvin looked around. For once, the silence wasn't cold. It wasn't judgmental. It was waiting, watching, respectful. "You'd really give me a shot?" he asked. "I'm giving us a shot," Miles said. "Because this company needs more people like you, people who see value where others see junk, who fix things because they still believe they can be fixed." Calvin nodded slowly. Then yeah, I'm in." He finally nodded. "All right, let's see what happens." But even as Calvin walked out of that room, his badge still said maintenance, and he knew this wasn't a promotion. It was a test, and not everyone wanted to see him pass. The following Monday, Calvin stepped off the elevator onto the 5th floor, a place he used to clean, not sit in. This time, no gray coveralls, just a crisp button-down shirt, khaki pants, and a pair of borrowed dress shoes that pinched at the toes with every step. He didn't complain. He carried nothing but a black notebook and a pen without a cap. No laptop, no tech gear, just him. The engineering team didn't roll out the red carpet. A few nodded. Some avoided eye contact. Trevor didn't say a word. Miles had given Calvin an empty desk and an open invitation to observe team meetings. Nothing more. He wasn't expected to lead, just learn, contribute, and watch. By Wednesday, Elise started asking him for input. By Friday, Calvin was sketching wiring diagrams on the break room whiteboard, and people started noticing his handwriting. Tight, fast, technical, almost artistic. One afternoon, while troubleshooting a conveyor issue, Calvin rewrote a block of faulty code that had caused errors for weeks. He didn't say anything, didn't take credit. He just taped a note to the monitor. "Try this version, might run cleaner." It did, and it ran faster. That's when the whispers started to change. From "Who let the janitor in here?" to "Who is this guy?" But Trevor wasn't done. He started poking holes in Calvin's notes during meetings, making little comments dressed up as questions. "You sure that's the best way to approach a voltage drop?" Interesting idea. Probably not practical." "Rhodes, what textbook was that method from again?" Calvin never snapped back. He just listened, adjusted when needed, and kept showing up. Then one Thursday morning, everything changed. Miles called a full department meeting. Everyone assumed it was about the new scanner rollout. It wasn't. He pulled up a side-by-side video comparison. 2 sorting systems, one standard, one Calvin's rebuild. The room fell silent. On screen, Calvin's version processed nearly double the volume. Fewer errors, less downtime, smoother sequences. No one moved. No one spoke. Then Miles turned to the room. 3 months ago, this machine was declared scrap, he said. Now it's our new internal benchmark. He clicked to the next slide. Internal systems efficiency upgrade, lead C. Rhodes. There was a pause, then a few scattered claps, a few stunned glances. Trevor raised his hand, controlled but pointed. "Miles, don't you think this is moving a little fast? We still don't know what his long-term capabilities are." Miles didn't flinch. "I do," he said. "I've seen them." He looked around the room. "You know what I've learned these past few weeks? Brilliance doesn't always show up in a suit. It doesn't always come with a degree or a title. And if we wait for someone to hand us credentials before we listen, we're going to miss out on the ones who've been teaching themselves behind mop buckets and under flickering lights for years." The room stayed quiet until Elise raised her voice. He earned that lead spot. Period. Others murmured agreement. Heads nodded. Calvin stood, a little awkward, unsure if he should say something. Miles turned to him. You good with the assignment? Calvin cleared his throat. Yes, sir. I've already got some ideas. Then Trevor, the one who had tried to discredit him, finally spoke. Not with sarcasm this time, but something closer to respect. Guess I'll be reporting to you now, huh? Calvin gave a small half smile. Nah, we're all building the same thing. As far as I'm concerned, we're teammates. But deep down, he knew this wasn't about titles. This wasn't revenge. This was about proving, even quietly, what someone can really do when the world finally stops underestimating them. 2 weeks later, Calvin's life looked the same, but felt entirely different. Same small apartment off Jefferson Boulevard. Same beat-up Ford Ranger with the squeaky belt. Same habit of fixing his own plumbing when the sink leaked. But now, when he walked through the building, people saw him differently. They asked questions, listened closer, spoke to him like he belonged. And one morning he found a new badge waiting on his desk. Plain, white, but it read, Calvin Rhodes, Systems Development Lead Tech. He didn't ask for it. He didn't expect it. He just stared at it for a long time, then quietly clipped it to his shirt. His new workspace was still cluttered, old fans, busted remotes, stripped wires. But now, interns came to him for advice. He was sketching redesigns, proposing hardware improvements, helping teams repurpose discarded tech, and building things most had written off. Downstairs, the janitorial staff gave him a nod when they passed. One night, as he left late, a security guard clapped him on the shoulder and said, "Make us proud, Cal." But the biggest change? He started believing it himself. He still doubted sometimes, still kept his head down, but he believed, not just in machines, but in himself. And for the first time in a long time, that was enough. You're telling me a former janitor is leading your most sensitive upgrade rollout? Derek Flanagan, a corporate manager from the Cincinnati division, asked with a smirk as he pulled Miles aside after a system demo. Miles didn't blink. "Number, I'm telling you that our most capable team member is leading it." Derek scoffed. "And when it falls apart?" Miles smiled calmly. "Then we fix it, like he's been doing since the day I met him." Back in his corner of the 5th floor, Calvin could feel it. The eyes, the second guessing, people reviewing his diagrams twice, double-checking his specs. He told himself it didn't matter, but it did. Late one night, long after the office had gone quiet, Calvin sat alone at his desk, staring at the redesign he'd been working on for days. Nothing was clicking. Every connection felt wrong. His shoulders were slumped. His pen rested still. And then it came, that familiar, quiet voice in his head. "You're not supposed to be here." He stood up, ready to pack it in. Then, a soft knock on the open door. "Elise, you all right?" she asked gently. Calvin hesitated. "Yeah, just tired." She stepped in, pulled up a chair, sat down across from him. "Can I tell you something?" "Sure." "That first week you joined us," she said, "I went home every night thinking I wasn't good enough to keep up." He blinked. "What? You?" "I mean it," she said. "You saw things the rest of us missed. You did things we didn't even think were possible, and the crazy part, you never made any of us feel small for it." Calvin looked down. "Some days, I don't know if I'm fooling everyone or just fooling myself." "You're not," she said. "You belong here. You always did." "We're just lucky we finally noticed." He smiled, just a little, then turned back to the schematic. "Wait, something clicked." "Hold on," he said. She leaned in as his hand suddenly moved faster, sketching a new line across the diagram. That was it. The missing link. He found it. Elise grinned. "Told you." What neither of them realized in that moment was that this small breakthrough in a quiet corner office would go on to ripple through the entire company. A month later, the new system went live, not just in Fort Wayne, but across all 5 Brylock distribution centers. Calvin's design didn't just meet expectations, it shattered them. Productivity rose, downtime dropped. Efficiency benchmarks were rewritten, and then it happened. His name appeared in an internal memo, in performance reports, in the company newsletter. He read the sentence 5 times before it sank in. Calvin Rhodes, lead technician, spearheaded the design of our new adaptive sort system, built entirely from recycled components and ingenuity. No titles, no degrees, just the truth. There was no party, no speech. That wasn't Calvin's style. Instead, on the night of the rollout, he took a quiet walk back to the old storeroom, the one where it all began. The light still flickered. The vending machine still made that strange hum. But now there was a small new detail. A nameplate on the sorter unit. Refit and restored by C. Rhodes. February 2025. He just stood there, taking it in. Then Miles walked in behind him. They wanted to move this to the training center, Miles said. I told them to leave it here. Not everything needs to be polished to be important. Calvin nodded. Didn't expect all this, you know. I didn't expect to be taught a lesson, Miles replied, by someone who was fixing machines after hours. But here we are. They stood in silence for a beat. You changed how this place thinks, Miles added. About potential, about people, about what really matters. Calvin looked down. I just wanted to make something work. And you did, Miles said. But more than that, you reminded us that talent doesn't always wear a tie. He turned to leave but paused at the door. You ever think about finishing your degree? Calvin smiled. I don't need a paper to tell me I'm good at something. No, Miles said, returning the smile. But if you ever want it, we'll pay for it. They shook hands, not out of formality, but mutual respect. Then Miles walked out and Calvin remained, alone in the room where it all began. Surrounded by spare parts, dusty bins, forgotten wires, and yet now it felt like the nerve center of something bigger than machinery. He hadn't just built a system. He had built belief in himself, in people like him, in the quiet idea that sometimes the most overlooked voices are the ones holding up everything we take for granted. So if you're still watching, and you've ever felt like you don't come from the right place, or don't look like the person they expected, remember Calvin, your value isn't measured by where you start. It's measured by what you do when no one's watching. So keep building, keep showing up, keep proving them wrong until they stop asking if you belong and start wondering how they ever got by without you, because somebody's always watching. Make it count.